Awesome. We're in business here. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here to present to the Michigan Wetlands Association. Today, I'm going to go over information on federally listed mussels in Michigan. So I'm going to talk about some general information on mussel habitat, survey protocols, as well as touch on Endangered Species Act compliance process, and then go over some specific conservation measures that we typically recommend for mussels. As was already discussed at the end, we should have time for questions, no problem. So here in Michigan, we have 5 federally listed freshwater mussels. 4 of the 5 species are listed as endangered, including clubshell, rayed bean, snuffbox, and northern riffle shell. Round hickory nut was listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act in March of 2023. And all 5 species occur in the lower peninsula of Michigan. So as I mentioned, the round hickory nut was listed as threatened on March 9th, 2023. When the service lists a species as threatened, we can actually promulgate special regulations pursuant to 4D of the ESA, so which 4D is essentially a section of the ESA that allows us to tailor protections for threatened species. And these protections essentially allow us to better address the specific conservation needs of the species. So according to these rules, certain actions with a minimal level of disturbance and no anticipated long-term negative impact on the species would be exempted from ESA prohibitions. So those prohibitions that I'm sure you're familiar with under Section 9. So the prohibitions for round hickory nut, the exemptions to the prohibitions for round hickory nut incidental take are associated with conservation and restoration efforts by state wildlife agencies, channel restoration projects, bank restoration projects, and forest management activities that implement state-approved BMPs. Critical habitat was also designated in approximately 921 river miles within 14 units of critical habitat that span across 8 states. However, in Michigan, there is no critical habitat designated for round hickory nut. In Michigan, round hickory nut is extant in the Bell, Pine, and Black River watersheds. Salamander mussel is the other species that I wanted to briefly touch on. Specifically, I thought it would be nice to highlight their unique life history because it could potentially have implications for sampling and survey techniques in the future, as well as provide a quick ESA update, so a quick Endangered Species Act update. So just a little bit of background, salamander mussel is a short-lived species, approximately 10-year lifespan. They have very thin, fragile shells in comparison to other species. But the thing that makes them really unique is that they are the only native freshwater mussel in North America with a non-fish host, which is the mud puppy. And that essentially dictates why the habitat they occupy is so unique, because they're typically found under mud puppy shelter habitats, so large flat rocks, logs, and other debris, bedrock crevices. So this is a mussel that you would not typically find in kind of traditional mussel surveys. They have, for that reason, a clumped or almost colonial distribution as well. So you might find many individuals under one large flat rock or under one log. The service proposed salamander mussel as endangered on August 22nd, 2023, based on an ongoing species status assessment process, which is essentially the scientific basis for our proposed listing decision and proposed critical habitat designation. Populations were analyzed during the SSA process at the hydrologic unit scale, the USGS hydrologic unit scale, and specifically salamander mussel populations have been defined at the Huck 8 scale. Extant populations in Michigan occur in the Clinton River hydrologic unit, as well as the St. Clair hydrologic unit, which includes the Bell, Pine, and Black rivers. We have also proposed approximately 2,011 river miles of potential critical habitat for a total of 37 units range-wide. In Michigan, we do have proposed critical habitat for salamander mussel. It includes 7 river miles in Oakland County and 23.6 river miles in Mill Creek in St. Clair County. The public comment period for this proposed listing and proposed critical habitat designation closed on October 23rd, 2023. And so we're currently in the process of considering the public comments that we received. A final decision for this proposed rulemaking is due in August of 2024. So this is just a map showing the current and historic range of the species. As I mentioned, we have been working on a species status assessment for several years, and that is what our proposed endangered listing is based on. 66 of 110 historical populations are extant or presumed extant, which it results in a 40% reduction in the species in populations range-wide. And more than 80% of all populations are experiencing high risk from some of our top risk stressors. This is just a map of the proposed critical habitat units. So once again, there are 37 proposed units, all of which are occupied. And the total number of river miles proposed for designated critical habitat is once again, approximately 2,011. So given that mussels inhabit really variable habitat depending on the species, I thought it might be helpful to just quickly go over different types of suitable habitat. Typically, mussels are associated with riverine habitat that is sandy, gravel, has decent flow, which once again, kind of going back to that list of our 5 currently federally listed species, would be considered ideal habitat. But for some species like slipper shell that's state listed or salamander mussel that's proposed, there can be quite different habitat that those species occupy. For slipper shell, they might be found in a backwater area that's mucky or silty. And once again, for salamander mussel, they're found in that mud puppy shelter habitat. So quite outside areas where other kind of species like our federally listed mussels or other state listed species would typically be found. So really the key to understanding mussel presence would really be focused on the presence of stable substrate and also appropriate water quality. And these are just some pictures of kind of what we would consider typical riverine substrate for where we would find species like snuffbox or club shell or northern riffle shell. Impoundments can also be habitat for mussels. Once again, going back to that idea that it really depends on the species and what the species-specific habitat needs are. So therefore, activities affecting things like water elevation, such as drawdowns or erosion control measures and changes in the water quality within an impoundment, all do have the potential to impact mussels and suitable habitat for those species. This is just a picture of mussels that were found within an impoundment. So given that mussels can occur in variable habitat depending on species, I thought it would be helpful to just go over mussel survey protocols that we have here in Michigan. These protocols incorporate critical predictive modeling on mussel distribution that I think is really helpful for project planning. So we have 3 protocols in Michigan now: the Rivers Protocol, the Lakes and Reservoir Protocol, and the Drawdown Protocol. And all of these protocols are geared towards minimizing impacts and maximizing conservation for mussels by outlining survey guidelines and methodology, relocation and rescue procedures, predictive modeling to help inform mussel distribution, and then associated permitting requirements and the regulatory framework for compliance with state and federal statutes. So there's a lot of good information in these protocols, and we really worked hard. DNR and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service really worked hard to try to make these 3 protocols complementary of each other. So one of the key components, as I mentioned, are the river and lake and reservoir protocol documents is the predictive modeling that has informed mussel distribution mapping within these bodies of water. And the predictive modeling is described as the river grouping or lake reservoir group, and they're common to both protocols. So in both protocols, a group 1 indicates areas where state special concern species are likely to be present. Group 2 are bodies of water where state listed species are likely to be present. And group 3 are bodies of water where federally listed species are likely to be present. And the purpose of the grouping is really to help define the level of survey effort, the necessary permits that may be required when working in those stream groupings or reservoir groupings, and what the relocation authorization process is, depending on, once again, what group you're in. The groups were based on the following: so element occurrence data, and then a species distribution model that was developed by DNR. And the modeling we have been trying to update. And so hopefully as this year goes on, we'll reflect new occurrence data as well. So how do you know if your project occurs where a listed species, in this case, freshwater mussels, may be present? Well, we have quite a few online planning tools that I think are really helpful. The Michigan Natural Features Inventory Mussel Mapper is a fantastic resource for identifying river and stream group. The Mussel Mapper currently has riverine areas delineated as group 1 through 3, but the majority of mapped impoundments are not in the mapper yet, with the exception of a few. And our hope is that, once again, the lake and reservoir groups will be incorporated into the Mussel Mapper, hopefully this year. So typically in those cases where you're looking at a reservoir or a lake and it isn't mapped already, I would recommend using the riverine protocol modeling that leads into and out of the impoundment as an indicator of what grouping the impoundment might be, as well as then, of course, consulting directly with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the DNR staff to see what data might already be available that would help indicate what group and what level of survey effort might be appropriate. So this is just a screenshot that shows the mussel mapper. Purple is group 1, green is group 2, and red is group 3. And so then once again, once you know your stream grouping, you can consult the protocol document on what regulatory compliance framework might be associated with the work that you're doing, depending on what group you're in. This is just another screenshot that shows how easy it is to zoom into a very specific stream segment. And that would indicate what group you are in. And then if you click on the stream segment, it shows you what species might be associated with that particular stream reach. This is the map that's currently available in the Lakes and Reservoirs protocol. And that are the mapped Lakes and Reservoirs protocol, sorry, the mapped Lakes and Reservoirs in the state of Michigan. And soon this map should be incorporated into the online mussel mapper. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to go over our online planning tools within the Fish and Wildlife Service that could assist you with the ESA compliance process. So IPAC is our information for planning and consultation website. It's essentially our project planning tool. And through IPAC, you can do a number of things. You can obtain an official species list, which is a list of all essentially the federally listed species, federally listed critical habitat, migratory birds, Coastal Barrier Resource Act units, and other natural resources that might be within your action area or project area. And if you haven't used IPAC before, it's actually really easy. I'll kind of go through the main steps, but essentially you just have to sign up for an account using your email, and then you're pretty much ready to go. I'm going to also talk about our assisted determination keys, which is an essentially expedited ESA compliance process that is also offered through IPAC. So what are D keys? D keys or determination keys are essentially a logically structured set of questions, which is assisting an applicant in making an effect determination for their project. And when I say effect determination, essentially, in kind of the most simple terms, how your project is going to affect a federally listed species. Is it going to have no effect? Or is it not likely to adversely affect a listed species? Or is it possibly going to may affect and possibly likely adversely affect a listed species? So DKeys are relatively new in IPAC, but the idea of DKeys are not new. So this slide essentially shows a decision tree or flow chart. And we've used these types of decision trees and flow charts for many of our species. And essentially, we turn these flow charts or decision trees into DKeys. And so IPAC allowed us to do this by incorporating spatial data to help automatically answer some questions for the user. And then this tool in IPAC also helps to automate this ESA compliance process for the user. So if the project qualifies, IPAC can deliver an automated, what we call concurrence letter. That's essentially our official correspondence and demonstrates ESA compliance for a particular project. So there are a couple of DKeys available for projects in Michigan, but the one that will be applicable to folks in this webinar is the All Species Michigan Determination Key. And this key covers federal and non-federal projects in Michigan. It's meant to cover essentially low impact projects, so kind of smaller scale, smaller scope, that might be kind of more routine. We do exclude some types of projects from the D key, including things like wind energy, certain communication towers, aerial application of chemicals, withdrawal of large volumes of groundwater, because these projects, because of the scale or the scope, we really can't essentially create a D key that's powerful enough to use an automated process to provide an expedited compliance for projects like that are a bit more complicated. Another example would be new FERC licenses and relicensing. Those are not covered by the key. But the All Species Michigan Determination Key can cover projects like pier construction, things like shoreline protection, beach grooming, dredging, wetland fill, as long as they aren't in areas that are important to listed species. And in some cases, there's certain conservation measures that we can provide and can be implemented. So it is applicable to a lot of projects, but there are some limitations to the D key. This is just the homepage of IPAC. We do have a slide, or I do have a slide at the end that has a list of resources that we can share, and we can share the link for the IPAC homepage. And once again, like I said, it's super easy. You just need to register to get an account. You just need your email, and then you answer some questions about your agency or your company if you're working for a consulting company, and then you're pretty much good to go to use the tool. So let's just kind of go through an example, because I think that is a good way to illustrate how straightforward and easy IPAC is to use. So you can enter an address for your project location and zoom in on the map, and you can either upload a shapefile for your proposed project area, or you can draw the action area using your mouse in IPAC. And one thing to note when you're defining your project area, it's really important that you're considering both direct and indirect effects when you're either drawing that polygon or even when you're creating your shapefile, because those indirect effects are really critical and also need to be considered. And we'll talk about this a little bit more with respect to mussels. So once you've drawn your polygon, you'll be prompted to give your project name and add a complete project description. And, we really do emphasize with applicants that it's really important to provide a really good project description so that, if there is a question about the letter that is generated through the D key, we have an understanding of what the project is. So we can kind of, we audit the D key, and we are able to do a better job and a quicker job auditing with a better project description. So once you put in your project name and your complete project description, then IPAC will take you to the project home screen. And over on the right, you see the blue Start Review button. So you just want to start your review. And then this screen just shows the workflow in IPAC. So step one is the official species list. All federal projects are required to obtain an official species list using IPAC. Even for projects without a federal nexus, if you want Fish and Wildlife Service to review or comment on a report or project, it will need an official species list at a minimum. So again, step two is optional, but we recommend to expedite consultation that, you go ahead and you're perfectly able to use a determination keys if that's something that you're willing to do. And then the last step that is X'd out is the Conservation Package Builder tool. And at this time, we don't recommend using the Conservation Package Builder. It's just not equipped yet to provide a tool that's super user-friendly for Michigan. So once again, I would recommend skipping that step 3. Great, so then this is the button you're just gonna click to get that official species list. You'll have to answer a few more questions about what type of project it is and your role in the project. And then IPAC will generate a PDF letter with your official species list. Then it'll automatically bring you to step 2. And again, this is an optional step, but it's designed to assist you with your endangered species analysis and expedite the process. So to use the All Species Michigan determination key, you just click Evaluate here to use the Michigan D key, and then you're on your way. So the D key will then ask you a series of questions about the project. It relies on hidden spatial data once again to decide which questions an applicant gets. So you can't see some of the questions and the logic, but they're there in the background. And again, you'll be given a series of questions, answer yes or no. And it's almost like, I think Carrie Tansey, when she gave this presentation previously on the D key, equated it to like a TurboTax for endangered species compliance. So, you're essentially given questions and answering yes or no, you might be given additional questions. And hopefully at the end, you're getting to the appropriate determination for your project. And so at the end, we can generate, based on the questions and how they're answered, a concurrence letter or a consistency letter that is from our office. And so after you complete the determination key questions and get a letter generated, you want to click Exit Review again. Don't proceed to step 3 with the Conservation Package Builder. And this screenshot's just showing you where the letters that are generated from IPAC are found. They're in the Project Home Documents folder. So the species list will be there and the D key output letters will be there. And this is just an example of one kind of letter that's generated. So this one is a may affect verification letter. So this is just more for reference so you know where those documents go. So this is actually an example of a letter. It has the project code at the top and the project name. It includes a list of the species and the determinations that the D key assisted you in making. It will also have instructions on next steps if any are needed. So this is the official correspondence from our office, and many times nothing additional is needed. So if it's a federal project, there might be a 30-day, what we call verification period. And this letter shows you that language. And it says that if you don't hear from us essentially within 30 days, you can assume that we concur and you're good to go. So this gives our office time to basically review, audit the letter. And once again, if there's any issues that we see, we would reach out directly to you with questions. So here's another example of a may affect consistency letter. So you can see here that may affect is listed in the determinations in 2 different places. it doesn't mean if you get a may affect, again, it doesn't mean that you may not be able to get to not likely or no effect for that species using the D key. It just means that you need further assistance from our office. And so there is language at the bottom which directs you then to essentially coordinate further with our office and defines really the next steps. So once again, just another example, and you can see here that in the bottom, this is another may affect letter. And once again, just kind of gives you that direction on what those next steps should be. So this would not be this, if you get a may affect determination in your letter, it doesn't mean that your Section 7 or your ESA compliance is complete. It does mean that you need to coordinate further with our office. But once again, it doesn't necessarily mean that through coordination and conversations with us, you may not, you may be able to get to a not likely to adversely affect or a no effect determination. But once again, the letter will include language to coordinate directly with us. So once again, just in summary, there might be ways that or information that you already have in your files where it allows you to make a different determination than what's in the D key. So once again, coordinate with us if you have that kind of information. There might be BMPs that we actually could suggest or that you might want to provide that would also help you maybe move from a may affect to a not likely to adversely affect or no effect determination. The key is just to, once again, follow up with our office. We're reviewing all of these letters and we're happy to coordinate, and we'll definitely reach out as well if we have questions. And it's important to just be aware that for may affect determinations, if we can't get to not likely or no effect, the process for ESA compliance could be a bit more lengthy. And so that's something to just once again be aware of in terms of timing, kind of your compliance with whatever your project needs are. So making sure that you're coordinating with us far in advance. All right, so kind of shifting gears back to mussels. Now that we've gone over some online tools to scope your project, here are some things that I just thought it would be helpful to consider when you're specifically evaluating whether a project has the potential to impact listed mussels. Some of the things we consider are, does the activity have the potential to directly affect substrate? Will the activity change hydrology? Because we consider hydrology, changes to hydrology potentially an adverse effect. What type of water quality changes may result from this action? So for example, will your project result in changes in dissolved oxygen or temperature, sedimentation, sediment transport, nutrients, or even an increase in contaminants? So in thinking about some of these impacts, some examples of activities that might have the potential to take or adversely affect mussels might include, but once again, not an exhaustive list at all, but just to give you some idea, hydropower projects, construction activities. So for example, repairs or new infrastructure such as docks, boat hoists, seawalls, artificial beaches, dredging, installation of recreational infrastructure, boat ramps, boardwalks, things like that. And then construction disturbance within the riparian area. So erosion control measures, riprap, outfall pipes. Once again, not an exhaustive list, just some examples to kind of give you an idea. So at this point in the process, it's likely that a project proponent has used the mussel mapper and likely the protocols to determine what river, lake, or reservoir group their action falls within. And then also potentially has used the D key to screen their project for ESA compliance. And so while we always encourage all project proponents to first look at whether they can completely avoid impacts to listed mussels or suitable habitat, we understand that's not always possible. And so the next few slides just are really geared towards those situations where a project proponent has gotten essentially a may affect determination in the D key and is now looking at conservation measures to minimize those adverse effects or incidental take. So measures that minimize the direct and indirect impact areas or footprint are considered, including cofferdams to isolate an area, managing drawdowns in terms of the rate and season, implementing turbidity controls and soil and erosion control measures, and lastly, potentially rescue and relocation of mussels out of impact areas. And that's something we'll talk a little bit more about. And there are differences in authorization of relocation depending on whether you're in a group 2 or a group 3 stream. So once you've used all the available conservation measures to define the direct and indirect impact area, and then in most cases in group 2 and group 3 waters, the project proponents are required to complete a survey within that project area. And the survey is important because it not only informs the project proponent about mussel presence, but it also informs the applicant about what is the species distribution within the project area and what is the density of those species within the project area. I also wanted to just highlight the importance of the mussel survey season requirements, because there is a specific survey and relocation season in Michigan, which is from June 1st through October 15th. And it's important to consider with respect to project planning, for example, because this could really impact potentially like a construction schedule if it's not factored into the timeline for the project as a whole. So once again, really being aware of what permits might be required, what type of authorization for the state or, through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is necessary. So let's just talk a little bit about mussel relocation. Really the goals of mussel relocation are to maximize survival and fitness of relocated individuals, minimize risk to the resident mussel fauna at the relocation site, and then document relocation outcomes to inform future relocation efforts. And so really these essentially conservation practices are geared towards maximizing survival and fitness of relocated individuals. So this is just one last reminder that even projects with beneficial effects, so something like a dam removal or a restoration project, still have the potential to result in take of federally listed mussels. And so those impacts would still need to be accounted for, and incidental take would have to be authorized. And so you still need to coordinate with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for those projects, even though, in the end, they are contributing to potentially to recovery and have beneficial effects. If there's any sort of adverse effects or incidental take associated with those beneficial projects, those still, you still need to complete ESA incidental take authorization. So we're kind of already talking about permit requirements. If you're working in a group, really any stream, group 1, 2, 3, you need to obtain a cultural and scientific collector's permit from Michigan DNR Fish Division, given that all mussels in Michigan are protected. If you're working in a group 2 stream, you'll need to obtain a threatened and endangered species permit from Michigan DNR Endangered Species Program, and then work within group 3 stream. An individual would need to be a permitted individual under 10A1A of the Endangered Species Act for scientific purposes or enhancement of propagation or survival of a listed species. So if you're working in a group 3 stream, you need to have a 10A1A permit issued by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Endangered Species Act. 10A1A permits can be obtained via the permit application process, which is through e-permits now, but that's all handled through our regional office in Minnesota. And there's a webpage and lots of great guidance on applying for a 10A1A permit. I would allow for 90-day processing time, once you've submitted a complete application. Sometimes it can be quicker. Sometimes it can take a little bit longer. It just kind of depends on the complexity of the permit. If you're interested in obtaining a 10A1A permit, you have to be deemed qualified. So I would encourage anybody who's interested to continue to gain, professional development by taking classes, go out and accompany a permitted individual and get direct experience under that permitted individual's expertise and mentorship with that specific listed species that you're interested in obtaining a permit for. The 10A1A permit is required for survey activities, so what we would categorize as purposeful take. However, if a relocation is going to be necessary, that take is incidental to an otherwise lawful activity. And so that activity has to be, that action has to be authorized under a different mechanism under the Endangered Species Act through either Section 7 or Section 10A1B. And the timeframe and mechanisms associated with both parts of those portions of the Endangered Species Act differ in terms of timeframe and process. So once again, if you're working in a Group 3 stream and you think that there's the potential for relocation, I would definitely coordinate early with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to make sure that you're aware of all of the different compliance process, the pieces of the compliance process that are necessary to complete. And with that, I think I'm done. This is just a slide with different resources and links. And then I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Jess. That was great. We have one question right now. If other folks have questions, please put them in the Q&A and there's hands clapping.
Jessica. Yeah, well, thanks so much. I appreciate being invited to give this presentation to this group. So really appreciate it. Can I stop sharing, Amy, or?
Well, you might need your slides. Hold on, at least
okay
until I ask at least this first one.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for presenting. I think this is great. So the first question is, on the map, what about the missing streams? They aren't Group 1 or 2 or 3. How do the rules apply to them? And I think you kind of talked about it, but I thought maybe you should address it a little more directly.
Sure. About it. Yeah, and I'm just so that we're all on the same page. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So Group 1, 2, and 3 are mapped because we have element occurrence data, within those stream reaches or near those stream reaches. And so that data was able to be incorporated into the predictive model that DNR developed. So absolutely, there are probably, even looking at this map, I mean, there's large portions of Michigan, particularly the Upper Peninsula and the northern lower, that just aren't mapped because we don't have data on those streams. But once again, because all mussels are protected in Michigan, kind of regardless of where you're working, if you think you're going to be working in an area where there are native freshwater mussels, you would want to obtain a scientific collector's permit. And I don't want to speak for DNR, so I would just say if you have more questions on that, follow up with Michigan DNR Fish Division. But really, yeah, that's a good question. The groupings are really just based on, and the map is really based on where we had data that we could incorporate into that predictive model. Do you think answer the question, Amy?
Yeah, I think that does. The only thing I'll add too is that as part of avoidance and minimization of impacts, Eagle may require rescuing of stranded mussels and fish and other things. So, even though they might not be listed species, you may still see conditions on a permit relating to that.
Yeah, good point.
Okay. Here's another question. Is there any guidance to how far in advance minimum and maximum timeframes of construction relocation should take place? And then there's a second part of that. So if you want to answer that one first.
Yeah, That's another really great question. I wouldn't say there's like, a prescribed time frame. I guess I would just recommend that, for example, if you know you're going to be working in a group three stream and you're trying to complete your ESA compliance, um, once you know kind of that the proposed action is complete in terms of, you have a fairly good idea of what you're doing, where you're doing it, how you're doing it, then I would say that's a great point to start your compliance. We totally understand that there's uncertainty, of course, around projects. And as we work through compliance with applicants, we can account for that in certain ways. So I guess I wouldn't say that there's a set time frame, but I would say once you kind of have a pretty good idea of where you're how you're doing your project, what your project is, where it's occurring, then that would to me be an indication of a good time to start talking to us. And if some people come in even in advance of that because they're not necessarily aware of certain BMPs that we might recommend, and they may want to incorporate those into their proposed action. Um, so I guess it's variable. What we don't want to happen is to have somebody come in, let's just say, for example, during that short window of the mussel survey and relocation season, and they have to get their project done and there's not enough time for us to help them work through the compliance process if something like relocation is necessary. I don't know, Amy, if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I think that's good. And the next part is similar, and you started, I think, kind of getting there, but it says on a similar note, is there specific guidelines for how long a relocation effort occurs that it is valid for? And they're saying it has been greater than X number of years since the relocation occurred. Does the relocation have to happen again if construction gets pushed back, for example?
Yeah, so we've kind of landed on 2 years, but I would say that also can be flexible depending on, um, it can be very project specific depending on what was in the project area and what was relocated, how much data we have of the surrounding area. But I would say in general, we say relocation is good for about 2 years. Because we're not only accounting for animals that have moved back into the area potentially to recolonize that area, but there's also the potential that there's individuals that have been left behind, which we do account for when we authorize incidental take. But once again, trying to account for that streams are dynamic, right? These animals and these populations are moving, either on their host or with the bed load or what have you. We've kind of landed on that 2 years based on, kind of that comes from data around our region within the Fish and Wildlife Service seems like a reasonable time frame from a species perspective, from a biological perspective.
Great. One last question. So if anyone has another question they would like Jessica to answer, please put it in the chat. So the last one we have here is there an estimated time of when the mussel mapper will be updated to add more information?
Yeah, so it's supposed to be updated it was supposed to be like 2023, 2024. So like this winter, spring. We do have a working group meeting coming up, and that is one of the updates that we're supposed to get. So I am sorry and feel badly that I don't have like a specific date to give you, but I'm hoping that it's by the spring. If you're feeling like you have a specific project in mind in a particular reservoir or impoundment or even within a stream reach, and you feel like there might be more data, I would just reach out to DNR or to Fish and Wildlife Service, and we can try to help maybe figure that out with you.
All right. Another question came in. I think it was a follow-up to the discussion we had on the second question. Has there been any discussion about modifying, expanding the sampling relocation timeframes?
Uh, Not really. I mean, we definitely, so we have our dates, but then we also really, those dates are guided by air and water temps. So the season, once again, kind of really is tied back to the biological needs of the species and what we feel like is kind of the safest time frame for survey and relocation in Michigan. But I will say we are absolutely and can be flexible. We've had, as everybody knows, some really warm falls recently where we have warm temperatures well into October. And so um, I can speak for Fish and Wildlife Service. We try to be really flexible there. So there's definitely wiggle room, and that's also happened, kind of on the beginning of the season where we have a really dry, warm spring, and we're authorizing folks to get into the water ahead of those dates. So I don't think those dates will change, but I will just say that I feel like in general we and DNR as well as try to be fairly flexible, provided we feel like it's safe based on the biological needs of the species.
All right, that's another question just popped in. What enforcement options does U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have if there has been a take of federally endangered mussels?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's a little bit tricky to answer. We do have our Office of Law Enforcement that is the enforcement branch of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that can follow up on situations where we have concerns about unauthorized take. Um, I will say it's hard to answer that in a general, I guess, from a general perspective. I think pursuing a case for unauthorized take really depends on the situation. It really depends on kind of what happened, how it happened, where it happened. So I don't know that I can speak more specifically than that. I would just say that we do have an Office of Law Enforcement that does pursue cases at times, but I would say in terms of how that's done, it's very case specific.
I think that's a reasonable answer. I think it's similar to how our enforcement works with a referral and then a discussion of different options, depending on, how significant the violation is. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that sounds spot on, Amy.
Okay, Nicole, I see you turned your camera on. I think we're ready to wrap up.
All right, sounds good. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your knowledge on federally listed mussels in Michigan. We appreciate your time and expertise. Learned a lot of good stuff.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. And to all of the members out there viewing this webinar now, thank you for joining us, and we hope you can catch the next one. It's scheduled for March 19, and that is Eagle's overview of wetland exemption. So until then, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.